Hello, Ninth and O family. This is Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. I'm Brodie Starnes, and today we get to look at Romans chapter 14. Have you ever disagreed with someone to the point of where it affects how you feel about them? How about when you disagree over spiritual or church or even political matters? How many churches have you heard of that have split over frivolous matters? Do you have strong opinions? I know I do. But what do we do with these opinions? When we believe that we are right, how do we pursue unity? The 14th chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans has some answers. Here, we see this debate going on about different Jewish laws. And I want to give just a quick overview of this chapter and then draw some application points for us today. In verse 1, we see that Paul is describing the believers as strong and weak. The strong believers, they believe that they can eat anything. The weak believe that they should abstain from unclean food. This must have been a source of frustration and strife for the early church, because Paul opens with, as for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but do not quarrel over opinions. And then we jump down to verse 10, and we see that Paul goes on to ask this question: why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or why do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. And then we hop down to verse 13, and Paul makes his main argument of how the church should act in situations of differing opinions. He says, "Let us not pass judgment on one another, but rather decide not to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother." Paul goes on to emphasize in verse 18 through 19, whoever thus serves Christ is acceptable to God and approved by men. So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. He further emphasizes this by imploring in verse 21, it is not good to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. And lastly, in verse 23, we see this statement, which is often quoted: for whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. This whole section in chapter 14 can be summed up in the first two verses that are found in chapter 15. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each one of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. And this is often completely against what we want to do. We have rights, and we don't want those rights infringed upon. We have desires, and we want to do what we want to do. But Paul here, he calls us to lay down our rights, to lay down our desires in love and in service for our brothers and sisters in Christ. As we think about applying this text, it's important to note that this argument is not about anything sinful. This argument is about opinions, not anything that the Bible deems as sin. Paul's not talking here about anything sinful. He says, we as brothers and sisters in Christ, we have an obligation to protect one another from sin. That's found in James 5:19 through 20. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. But when it comes to opinions, Paul exhorts us, do not quarrel over opinions. And so, church family, we should know opinions are not bad. We are called to think, and we are called to firmly believe in what we believe. But the unity of the church And the unity of the gospel is more important than being right. To disrupt Christian unity over something that the Bible does not deem as sin is itself sin. And there's a lot that we can unpack in these verses, and there's a lot that should be unpacked in these verses. But I believe this one verse gives us a great application to leave with. Verse 21, "It is good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble." This can be frustrating. This can be hard. But let us strive as a church to set aside our differing opinions. Let us set aside our desire to be right. And let us do as the author of Hebrews tells us, stir up one another to love and good works. Thank you.